Welcome to The Explainer. So today, we're taking a seriously fascinating journey that bridges the gap between ancient folklore and, well, hardcore modern clinical data. I mean, think back for a second to those old cedar chests our grandparents used to store heavy winter blankets in, or maybe the wood shavings people used to keep closets fresh. For literally centuries, humanity has relied on cedarwood for everything from preserving textiles to traditional medicine. And honestly, that familiar, comforting scent is just where the folklore begins. Because recently, clinical researchers and pharmacologists have started putting this ancient botanical under the microscope, and what they're finding is absolutely incredible. We are talking about molecular and cellular mechanisms that most of us just never realized were at play. Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today's explainer. First up, we'll cover the science of cedarwood, then rewiring stress and sleep. From there, we'll look at hair growth and skin repair, followed by nature's ultimate pest control, and finally, we'll go over some crucial safety and toxicity warnings. Let's get right into it. I really love this quote from the research literature because it just perfectly sets the stage for us. It says, Cedarwood Essential Oil possesses a long history. Modern research now elucidates its molecular and cellular mechanisms. We all know that smell of a cedar closet, right? It feels folksy, kind of traditional, but the reality is that scientists are just now catching up to the immensely complex organic chemistry happening inside that wood. We're moving far, far past the idea of just a pleasant scent, and we're entering the fascinating realm of target receptors and cellular signaling. So, part one, the science of cedarwood. To really grasp this, we need to transition away from generic wellness industry terms like essential oils and pivot directly to the actual active phytochemicals, like what is literally inside this oil that makes it do what it does. Now, what's incredibly interesting here is how much the extraction method dictates the actual power of the final product. Traditionally, cedarwood oil is extracted using steam distillation, but modern research, including studies by the USDA Agricultural Research Service, shows that steam is actually kind of inefficient. It causes thermal degradation of the really delicate active compounds. But enter the new method, supercritical CO2 extraction. It sounds very sci-fi, but this high-tech process preserves the molecular structure without leaving behind any solvent residue. And get this, it generates a 30% higher yield overall. Plus, and this is the big one, it unlocks up to 3 times more of the active biological compounds compared to traditional steam. So, as a consumer, this is exactly why you'd want to look for CO2 extracted oils when you're checking out a product's label. And when we're talking about those active compounds, we really need to anchor our understanding on one specific molecule. It's called Cedrol. This right here is the molecular magic behind all the physiological effects we're about to explore. Cedrol is a highly lipophilic sesquiterpene alcohol. Now, being lipophilic just means it mixes really well with fats and lipids. It acts almost like a VIP pass, allowing it to effortlessly slip across cellular membranes right into the human body. In fact, it's the primary biological marker that scientists look for when they're measuring the clinical efficacy of a cedarwood extract. Which brings us to section 2, rewiring stress and sleep. So, what actually happens when Cedrol enters the human body? Well, let's shift our focus to the central nervous system. You might actually be surprised to learn that Cedrol acts via mechanisms that are remarkably similar to clinical anxiety medications. The crucial point really lies in the dosing data. In pharmacological studies, administering the oil at a dose of exactly 800 milligrams per kilogram significantly elevates serotonin levels in the brain. And as you probably know, that's the neurotransmitter responsible for mood stabilization and just general well-being. But it goes deeper. When scientists isolated pure Cedrol, they found it interacts directly with GABAergic pathways. That's the exact same inhibitory neurotransmitter system that clinical benzodiazepines target to calm down an overactive, anxious brain. So, this interaction triggers a massive cascade in your autonomic nervous system. It lowers spontaneous locomotion, which basically means it physically and noticeably calms you down. It decreases stress-induced corticosterone, it lowers both your systolic and diastolic blood pressure, and it causes a big spike in parasympathetic or rest and digest activity. But, okay, here is the most fascinating clinical fact about all of this. It's not just happening because it smells nice. Researchers actually proved this by testing it on totally laryngectomized patients. These are individuals who breathe through a stoma in their neck and literally cannot smell the oil at all. Even when inhaled straight into the lower airway without any olfactory sensation whatsoever, it triggered the exact same drop in blood pressure and that spike in parasympathetic activity. It is a direct physiological trigger, completely independent of smell. How wild is that? Moving right along to Section 3, hair growth and skin repair. Let's try to connect these complex neurobiological mechanisms to everyday human desires. If this botanical powerhouse can calm our central nervous system on contact, what exactly is it capable of doing for our skin and hair? Well, the data here is incredibly compelling. Looking as far back as a 1998 Scottish clinical trial, researchers found that 44% of patients with alopecia saw significant hair regeneration when using a cedarwood-based essential oil blend. 44%. And that's compared to just 15% in the control group. Now, to isolate the exact cause, more recent studies actually tested pure Cedrol against minoxidil, which is the established FDA-approved synthetic hair loss drug, in mouse models. And the data showed that topical application of pure Cedrol actually outperformed the synthetic drug in accelerating both hair length and skin pigmentation. Now, Cedrol doesn't just magically make hair appear out of nowhere. It actually triggers a very precise molecular cascade. First, it regulates what's called the JAK3/STAT3 signaling pathway. Then it activates the WNT3-alpha/beta-catenin germinative pathway. And finally, it deeply mitigates cellular oxidative stress. Now, I know that's a lot of jargon, but you don't need to be a biochemist to understand what it means. Just think of these pathways as a literal wake-up call for dormant hair follicles. It forces them to remain in their active growth phase while simultaneously protecting the cells from premature damage. But hair growth is really just the beginning, because Cedrol brings its friends along for the ride. Another major compound in cedarwood is called Widdrol, and it acts as an absolute dermatological superpower. Widdrol powerfully inhibits nitric oxide, giving it some seriously potent anti-inflammatory action. These compounds actively speed up the production of type 1 collagen and elastin in human fibroblasts, which translates to faster wound healing and tangible anti-aging benefits. It physically protects keratinocytes from UVB radiation damage, and it even disrupts the structural integrity of bacterial biofilms, making it a highly effective treatment for severe resistant acne. It really does the whole shebang. All right, Section 4, Nature's Ultimate Pest Control. Now, there is a fascinating, almost tasteful irony to this next topic. We've just learned how this botanical powerfully calms the human nervous system and regenerates our tissues, right? Yet, the exact same oil induces absolute panic, biological chaos, and death in insects. So how exactly does a relaxing aromatherapy oil become a brutal weapon against pests? Well, it targets arthropod physiology in 3 specific, pretty intense ways. First is pheromonal disruption. Cedrol mimics or blocks their essential chemical receptors, essentially blinding their ability to navigate, feed, or mate. Second is respiratory occlusion. The volatile compounds physically block the spiracles and trachea of small insects, quite literally suffocating them. And third, cuticular dehydration. Because of its lipophilic nature, it dissolves the delicate, waxy outer layer of their exoskeleton, causing rapid, fatal dehydration. So for humans, it's a relaxing spa day, but for a tick, it is a literal horror movie. And it's highly effective, particularly against the nymphs of the black-legged tick, which is the primary carrier of Lyme disease. Let's impartially look at the data and see how it stacks up against synthetics. For environmental pest control, like keeping moths out of a closet, cedar oil absolutely crushes traditional naphthalene, also known as mothballs. It achieves an impressive 87% repellency rate completely without the regulated, possible carcinogen risks of mothballs. However, as a human mosquito repellent, the data shows it actually loses out to DEET. Why? Because cedarwood oil is highly volatile. While DEET persists on your skin for hours, cedar oil evaporates off warm human skin far too quickly, usually within 30 to 60 minutes. That makes it pretty impractical for a long hike unless you're planning on constantly reapplying it. And this brings us to our final part, Section 5, Crucial Safety and Toxicity Warnings. Because in the world of biology, we always have to remember that natural does not automatically mean harmless. We absolutely have to talk about safety here. For us humans, cedarwood oil is generally safe topically, provided it's properly diluted, because pure oil is actually a Category 2 skin irritant. But if ingested, it presents an extreme aspiration hazard. If it gets into the lungs during swallowing or vomiting, it can cause fatal chemical pneumonis. Now, when we pivot to pets, dogs generally tolerate diluted cedar shampoos very well for flea and tick control, but if you have cats, please listen closely. For felines, this oil is highly toxic and potentially fatal. Let's look at the specific biology of why that happens. Cats have a unique genetic quirk. They lack adequate activity of a liver enzyme called glucuronal transferase. Because they're missing this, their bodies simply cannot metabolize, process,
or excrete terpenes and sesquiterpenes like Cedrol. So the compounds rapidly build up in their system. Exposure can cause severe drooling, a complete loss of coordination called ataxia, generalized tremors, hypothermia, and even acute liver failure. And the thing is, many pet owners just don't realize that simply running an active ultrasonic diffuser in the living room is enough to aerosolize these compounds directly into their cat's lungs. So, bottom line, if you are a cat owner, Fluffy needs to stay completely out of the aromatherapy room.
As we wrap up today's explainer, I really want to leave you with this final thought. We've just traced how the compounds in a simple piece of cedarwood and actively interact with our brain's GABA receptors to calm anxiety, trigger complex cellular pathways to grow hair, and completely dismantle the biology of disease-carrying ticks, all while requiring some serious respect for its potent chemistry. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? As modern science finally catches up to ancient traditions, what other forgotten pharmacological resources are currently hiding in plain sight, just waiting to be understood? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll see you next time.